Hello, everyone. Welcome in or welcome back to the 7 Sage LSAT podcast. We are here every week to help you better understand the test, build better study habits, and also, of course, improve your LSAT score, we hope. I am Bailey, one of the instructors here at 7 Sage.
And I'm Henry, another 7 Sage instructor. Our topic today, how to make a smart final push for the February LSAT. How would you make that final push, Bailey?
I think that final push, the last maybe 3 or 4 weeks after perhaps you've taken January and you're like, okay, we got to just go all in. I'm set on applying this cycle. This is my last test. Let's see what happens in February. I think it's going to be a lot of combing over what you've already been struggling with, or maybe the most recent practice test, and figuring out what patterns might be popping up. Pattern recognition is what we're going to kind of focus this episode on. So what are some ways that pattern recognition looks like? Like, we can start with your wrong answer journal. When you were combing through what you've been wrong answer journaling, what were you looking out for?
Well, when we're doing pattern recognition, what we're doing is we're looking backwards to make a plan to move forwards. Right. And so one of the things that you want to be asking yourself
poetic.
when you're doing pattern recognition is you look for common things that have happened. In this case, we're talking about the wrong answer journal. And so we're looking for patterns within our wrong answers. Um, Now, sometimes that might be that we would actually have to look at the problems too. Right. I think sometimes when you do a wrong answer journal, like, okay, 137, I picked B, should have picked A. Here's the reason why. Because I think when we're doing pattern, like, the pattern doesn't have to just be within your answer choice that you picked, right? It could somehow be a thing that you found in the stimulus too, right? There's certain little things that are common throughout this test that can either help you or hurt you. I've always talked about this pattern that I recognized on my own before I even knew about pattern recognition, which is the many and most distinction, and how many answer choices that used many ended up being wrong because I was assuming that it meant most. And that's something I only really recognized after having, done enough problems and realized that, man, I was picking a lot of these answer choices that said the word many, or I would see it in an answer choice that I would know it's wrong, and I'd be like, oh, wait a minute, that says many too. And so by recognizing that pattern, I made a plan for myself to say, like, okay, many that never equals most. I said that many always equaled one. I actually don't know that that's correct. I've heard some pretty good arguments that many probably can't mean one because it has to be plural. So many could mean two. How about that? So you could just do what I did and instead say many equals two. And that's a free pattern for you to, I guess you don't even have to recognize it, a free pattern that I recognized for you.
We're passing out free patterns left and right. No, that's perfect. Exactly. Yeah. And like, one that popped up for me that I noticed, and I also had to miss so many questions to honestly realize that I was not understanding this, was whenever there's conditional reasoning in a question and there's some sort of statement that kind of combines some, what we would call at 7 Sage, those group 3 and then group 4 indicators, like a word like unless, until, without, and then a word like no, none, never. And I was always like, oh my gosh, this feels so complicated. There's 2 different rules that I'm supposed to follow when I get to those. Like, which one am I supposed to do? But really a good pattern to recognize here is that anytime they give you not something unless something else, like let's just use not A unless B here, knowing that not A unless B is true just tells me that A requires B happening. Like, you can think about it conceptually real quick. A is not coming to the party unless his buddy B is there. Well, A is needy. A requires B to come along with him. If A is there, B's going to be there.
Drop
and
the
so
not,
just
turn
being
the
able
unless
to
into an arrow.
Or yeah, exactly. Drop the not, turn the less into the arrow. It's also just like double negatives cancel each other out. But anyways, quick little things like that, where the more that you realize maybe you were struggling with questions or answer choices that dealt with something like that, because it's complicated wording and it might be confusing in the first place, you give yourself a quick little, well, here's exactly what I'm going to do when I see that sort of phrasing in the future, like many, most, not, unless. Here's exactly how I'm going to remind myself to think about it. And then you just start implementing that into new questions.
Yeah.
By the way, you can use like certain tags on 7 Sage, like conditional reasoning, or we should have a tag called quantifiers, if I'm remembering correctly, that'll give you questions that have to deal with like many, most, all, some, or conditional reasoning, of course, is like not A unless B, any of those. If, only if you're struggling with that, you can use all of those tags to create drills. And then you can do more drills with questions that have those same patterns.
Yeah. And this is why it's important too to not just look at your wrong answer journal, but to also actually like look at the problem itself because your difficulty with translating not A unless B, it could be that the answer choices say not unless B, not A unless B, or the stimulus says not A unless B,
Right.
and you might not recognize that if you just look at the wrong answer journal. So just doing like a cursory trek over the wrong answers that you picked over the last couple of weeks can be pretty helpful. And by the way, too, like a pattern, it's very unlikely that every single answer choice that you got wrong or every single problem that you got wrong, there's going to be one thing. There
Right.
might be 20 different things. That's not use
Oh,
20. There might
same.
be,
I was making like
right.
17 mistakes left and
Right.
right for
There
every
must
missed
be
question.
10 things. There might be 10 things that
There
are
must.
causing you. There doesn't have to be. There might be like 10 things that are causing you problems across 30 or causing you issues across 30 different problems. And so I think a good mark would be, have I seen this like in 3 of the questions that I've gotten wrong? If I've seen it in 3, you should make a plan to adjust your
Right.
mindset around that. It's not that every single if only I find out this 1 or 2 things, then I'll be able to crack this test. Unfortunately, that's not really how this test goes. It's 100 little things that you need to adjust in order to get the big 1-7 something.
1-7 blank, whatever, fill in the
Yeah,
blank,
whatever
or
you
whatever
want.
score
Or
you're
the
looking for.
1-6. I don't know, 1-5.
Or the
There's
1-5, literally whatever it is, that
whatever
a lot of
floats your
these things
boat.
are gonna apply. Yeah, and by the way, at this point, we have been talking about wrong answer journal a lot. In case you're not familiar with it, quick rundown. It's just when you're going through and really digging deep in the questions that you've missed, especially the ones that are just like making you scratch your head, like, what? I swear that I'm right and the LSAT writers are wrong. That's when you really want to go deeper and first ask yourself, well, what's wrong with this wrong answer choice? Like, why is the wrong answer wrong? And also, how did I talk myself into it? Then, what about the right answer? How did I overlook it? Why did I eliminate it if I did? Why is it right after all? And then, got to have some sort of action item, takeaway. What can I do better next time? I always try to give myself maybe a little drill set that I could put together, even just 3 questions that have to do with a similar question style or pattern of reasoning that I'm seeing in there. And then also some sort of strategy like, hey, if I keep noticing that I'm dealing with the like mixing up many versus most, I'm going to remind myself as soon as I see the word many, that just means 2 or more. When I see the word most, that means 50% or more, or
Mm,
more than 50%.
mm,
Giving yourself like that actual, here's exactly what I'm going to do action item is going to be so much more helpful. And so
yes.
that's also what we're talking about in terms of not just doing that once and never looking at it again, but combing over your wrong answer journal and reviewing it, seeing where you can find those patterns. I tried to get in the habit of doing that every morning, definitely at the end of every week or beginning of the next week when you're kind of setting goals for what your studying is going to look like. And yeah,
Yeah.
anything to add?
No, just that once you do this a little bit and then you start doing new problems again, then when you either get a question right or wrong, you'll be able to fit that into, well, have I seen this before? Right? Is this something that I reviewed?
Right.
Is this one of my issues? And that can be a marker for success. Maybe you don't get a perfect score on the LR section or the LR drill that you did, but hey, look, right, this one thing that has given me trouble before, I recognize that when I was doing it. Or if it's still an issue, you got to, I don't know, hit yourself on the head and say, no, how can I recognize this? One thing I like to
Hit
do,
yourself on the head.
right, yeah, no,
It's
it's true.
true.
One thing I like to do before I did a lot of my questions or when I was doing my drills is just do a quick review to remember things that I would mess up. Always just
Same.
refresh yourself, right? So if not A unless B gives you not A unless B, if A then B, right?
Mhm.
Before you do the test, so you can get those reps.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
No, and
Yeah.
I found it helpful too to like really understand those things so much that as soon as my practice test started, and then I honestly did this on my real test as well, I could just jot down a little reminder on the top of my scratch paper. Like I of course wouldn't go in with my scratch paper already written on because the big no shame.
Cheating.
Um, no cheating, bad.
Yeah.
But if a quick little thing that you want to really remind yourself is just not A unless B equals if A then B, write it down right away. And I mean, chances are at that point, if you could write it down, you do know it like the back of your hand. But better yet, to just have something in front of you that you realize that you struggle with to remind yourself. And on that note, too, I would kind of use that for kind of like a little LSAT mantra: slow is
Mm,
smooth, smooth is fast. Slow down when you're reading, really make sense of it. Like little things that you want to just kind of drill into your own brain. Helpful to just repeat them to yourself time after time, write them down on little
yeah.
sticky notes around your space,
Mm.
maybe jot it down on your scratch paper, whatever helps.
Shall we talk about patterns within the LSAT itself rather than?
We shall talk about more big picture patterns. Which
Yeah.
which which do you see?
I don't know. So, I mean, And I hate to ring a bell that's already been rung, as it were, right? Is that
To
a phrase? To re-ring, to
re-rung a
re
bell, or to
yeah,
re-ring the bell.
to re-ring the rung bell. I hate to re-ring the rung
It
bell.
should be a good phrase. It should be a
I
phrase.
I
It
know,
should
I
be a
hate
good
to
one.
re-ring the wrong bell, but phenomenon hypothesis, right, it's all over this test. It's a
I knew you
very
were gonna say
common
that.
argument. So when
Yes.
you have phenomenon hypothesis, what you might say is, "Hey, look, there is a loud sound. That's a premise. And so conclusion, someone, I don't know, someone rung a bell," I guess. Right? Yeah. Yeah, the
No, this is
hypothesis
good because I
being
already have all these other ideas of what could be the loud sound that's not
right.
the
There could be a
bell.
bunch of different loud sounds, right? There's a bunch of different explanations. And so if you're in a weakening question, often what you'll find are answer choices, if this was the stimulus, are answer choices that are alternative explanations for why there might be a loud sound. There's a fight. There's a
Bailey
reunion.
yelled.
You yelled. Exactly. I was thinking of, when there's like soldiers come home and
Oh, yeah, that's a
it's
good
like a
one. Like,
reunion
somebody's
and
cheering at
someone
the airport. It's a good,
right,
yeah,
like,
I
"Oh
always
my god," it's a
cry at
surprise.
those
Great. Yeah, it's
videos.
great.
Good
Who
one.
we love that, right? We love
Love
that.
that.
Not the war part, but the coming home part. Maybe the war part too.
So
That
many
could be
loud sounds in
maybe
the
there's a loud
world.
sounds because there's a war. Who's to say? There's a bunch of different loud sounds out there. Now, it's really helpful to recognize this pattern because again, if you recognize it, you can look for an answer choice even if you don't know what exactly the answers will say. Almost certainly, the answer is gonna be an alternative explanation. It's like 90% of the time that's the case
I
when you
love
have this
doing
pattern.
that. Yeah.
So, the key though is recognizing this pattern, and maybe you have trouble with doing that. So, one thing to tell yourself is that if you're in a weakening question, I would just prepare myself for something like phenomenon hypothesis. Right? Oh, there's an
Right.
observation and there's an explanation. Can I look at this problem in this way? Right? Where there's an observation and an explanation. Two, certain types of stimuli will lend itself to this. One of them being studies, right? Usually on the LSAT, at least in LR, if you're in a weakening question or strengthening question, and they talk about like a study, and there's a relationship between two things. The scientists ran this study. Turns out that
Hmm.
kids who were bad also had a lot of sugar. So it must be that bad kids crave sugar.
I love that. I'm like, how are we measuring bad? Who knows?
I don't know. Yeah, whatever it means.
Bad
Bad kids crave
sugar.
sugar.
Exactly. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, correlation.
Doesn't
That's a
equal
phenomenon,
causation. No.
right?
Right?
Doesn't
So
necessarily mean that one causes the other. So many different things that could explain that.
right. It could be that sugar causes bad kids. That's possible.
Right. Or being bad makes you want to eat a lot of
Yeah.
sugar.
Right. Maybe you can
Or,
be possessed. That makes you bad. But then also being possessed makes you crave
and
sugars. The demons, they
that's a
like
good
sugar.
one.
Yeah. Is sugar
Demons
demonic? I don't
inside
know.
me. They all love sugar. No,
There's
no,
a
no,
bunch of
no.
different
I can
explanations.
tell just based on the vibes. Sugar is not demonic.
Okay. Sure. We'll go with that. So that wouldn't
Thank
be a
you.
good explanation, but you can think of other ones. And when we're looking at a weakening question and you see like a study, I usually would say start thinking of alternative explanations. Why might this correlation exist? Why is this happening?
Right.
The other little tidbit too is that if you're predicting that there's phenomenon hypothesis, sometimes there are answer choices or excuse me, stimuli that it doesn't really look phenomenon hypothesis-y, but it actually is. And so if you
Right.
go in expecting phenomenon hypothesis and see, is there a way to read into this argument? Oh, hey, look, there's an observation and an explanation. Then
Right.
I would really recommend looking for alternative explanations for that observation. I'm thinking about one problem here with like sports food. I don't know if you know this question. It's about how few
Sports food.
athletes would
Oh,
buy sports food if were it not for expensive advertising campaigns. It doesn't really look
I
like a
remember that.
study, but if you think about the way that argument works, they're noticing that athletes are buying sports food, and so they think that it must be that advertising campaigns is
Got
causing that,
it.
when there could be other reasons to buy sports food. And
Right.
so even though it's not written in a clear phenomenon hypothesis way, when you look at what the argument is doing, you can recognize that that structure is there. And so I think that's one
Right.
pattern on the LSAT that's very prevalent that you can look
Agreed.
for. Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally just weird thing happens. Somebody tries to explain it. Always be thinking about alternative explanations. And I think you might have said this, but just to recap, strengthening questions will usually block or eliminate alternative explanations with the right answer. Weaken
Mhm.
questions will introduce alternative explanations with the right answer. And then resolve, reconcile, explain questions. That's just like the name of the game. There is a weird thing that happens in the stimulus, and the right answer will explain it. Or
Yeah.
like, you're trying to figure out which ones don't fully.
Same thing with necessary assumption, by the way. It's really common in necessary
Yes.
assumption, right, where you
Causal
have
reasoning, necessary assumption.
phenomenon
Yeah.
hypothesis, and then, like a strengthening question, when you have that stimulus, it often will eliminate alternative explanations. So
Right.
that's
It'll
something
be
to be
like,
on the
well, it's
lookout
not the
for.
case that this other thing happens.
Usually,
Nice.
though, I would start with weakening, like, if you're looking to build that into your repertoire, just because I think, 1, it's a little bit easier to think of what would be an alternative explanation than to look for answers that eliminate it for whatever reason, right? People have, I
Right.
feel like, more psychologically okay with introducing explanations that are
Right.
problematic. And then 2, I think strengthening and necessary assumption, they have a little bit more variety. I feel like phenomenon hypothesis is a little bit more in weakening than it is in something like a strengthening
I
or a
agree. I
necessary
noticed
assumption.
that too. Yeah, because necessary assumption, like, there's plenty of different ones. It could be a little bit more, and these are going to be other patterns that you can look out for in other question types, like a premise to conclusion gap,
Mhm.
where there's just some sort of gap or hole in the reasoning. We tag those as like link assumption. If you want to look out for questions that just have like new unsupported idea in the conclusion, needs to connect back to the premises. A lot of sufficient assumption questions are like that as well as pseudo sufficient assumption. And then also a lot of necessary assumption I noticed being more of a cost benefit analysis where it's
Mm.
like, hey, we got a
Yeah.
couple options here. At the end of the day, we're going to choose option two. And what you have to assume in that case is that, well, the pros of option two outweigh the pros of option one, and also the cons of option two are not outweighed by the cons of option one.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, those are the main ones that I see though. It's like causal, link assumption, cost benefit analysis.
Yeah. I guess we could talk about some more. I mean, those are patterns in necessary assumption, so just be on the lookout for that, right? Where in necessary assumption, if they make the recommendation like you should do this, and
Yes.
they give you like, here are the positives of it. Think about what about the negatives, right? That's a pretty common
Right.
thing. That's true in flaw questions too, when they say it's like this is the best thing, or we should take this course of action, and the reason why is like they have good things about it, or we shouldn't do it. So they have bad things about. Think about, well, is this everything we know about this course of action, right? Does this describe
Right.
every positive and every negative? If the answer is no, that's an issue.
Right.
Another common issue that you'll find, or a common pattern, just for whatever reason, right? Sufficient assumption questions, premise to conclusion gaps. Uh,
Mhm.
whatever's in the conclusion must be in the premises, and if it's not,
Right.
you'll find it in the answer choice. I think that's a pretty common pattern, but we've probably covered that before. We don't need to recover that. Flaw
So what
questions.
else?
I think flaw questions. One pattern that I noticed too, and this is not a universal truth, but it's a good thing to check. Whenever the conclusion recommends that like this must happen, right, or you have to do this, always just check to make sure that that thing that must happen is a requirement in the premises.
Yes.
Right? If it's not, then it's going to be flipping sufficient and necessary condition or some iteration of that term,
Right.
right? They'll
The
some way to
oldest trick
describe
in the
that.
book.
It is the oldest trick in
Exactly.
the book, but kind of hard, I
It is.
think,
They
sometimes in
love to
flaw
use
questions.
it. But yeah, it's like it's not supposed to be like that's the easiest to spot trick in the
Mhm.
book. I mean, once you see them enough times, you can't unsee it. You're gonna be like, oh yeah, that's the classic. In the premises, they said if A is true, then B is true. And then in the conclusion, they were like, so if we want to do B, we must do A. And you're like, wait, what? No, that's going backwards. So
Yeah.
yeah, just being able to notice those things really quickly. And I like that, like looking out for that strong language in the conclusion. This must happen. Like, wait,
Yeah.
does it really have to happen? Or did they just flip flop that?
Yeah. Speaking of strong language too, I guess we could move to RC. Here's another pattern, right? Strong answers
Oh,
or more descriptive answer choices in RC tend to be wrong. Right? And less
yes.
descriptive and softer language answers tend to be. Now, this is truly a pattern in like the general sense, right? Where it's not the
Right,
law.
anywhere. Well, and it
Yeah.
just has to do with, like, any sort of inference style question, usually
Mhm.
weaker, more open-ended language, things that feel maybe more simple. It's just
Yeah.
easier to be right, like, just by nature, that is easier to support, and
Yeah.
so, you see that also in LR with most strongly supported inference style questions, but yeah, all over RC. When
Yeah.
in doubt, lean towards something that you have support for in the stimulus and also just or in the passage, same thing in LR, stimulus, but and also just is like it's pretty chill because I
Yeah.
used to be overlooking those answers all the time because I'd be like, oh, this is a complicated test, they're not going to give it to me that simple, or
Yeah.
like that seems too weak almost, and it's like, no, rarely should you be eliminating an answer choice for those reasons, if not at all.
Yeah.
Just be asking yourself, hey, is there support for this in the passage? And weaker, more
Yeah.
open-ended, usually
More
easier.
detail can only be a liability, right? Where
Right.
as you add more information, the less likely
Makes the
something is
threshold
to be true.
harder.
Yeah, exactly. It's just
Yeah.
more boxes that you need to check for it to be right. My friend drove a car. My other friend drove a car that was red. My other friend drove a car that was red while listening to hip hop music. My other friend drove a car, that was red while listening to hip hop music while having the windows down. Much easier to say my friend drove a car. Right? I'd rather bet on that than to say that my friend drove a car that was red while listening to hip hop music with the windows down. That's a lot more boxes you need to check for that to be a true statement. And so just being cognizant of that when you're looking at those answer choices, I think is useful. I guess one other pattern to mention, unless do you have anything else to add about that?
I was just gonna say I always like seeing where your examples are gonna go. I'm like, how do you come up with this random stuff?
I don't know.
And also, what were
That's
you
the
gonna say?
go-to for details.
Just
The car,
car,
red
add more
car. I
details
don't
to
know.
somebody driving a car. No,
Yeah.
that's a good one to have on deck. What were you gonna
I guess the
segue?
other mention that I'll have is that in RRE questions where you're supposed to explain some sort of fact, often what you'll have as a pattern is there's going to be two groups of people, and there's going to be some outcome that you wouldn't expect. For example, right? Someone is training for a race versus someone who did not train for a race. You'd probably expect the person who trained to win, but they
Mhm.
didn't. The person who didn't train won the race. And so you're supposed to explain that. That is only confusing if everything is identical except for one training. And so what you'll find is that right answers will often draw a distinction between those two people. It might say, hey, look, the person who trained was worse before, right? They were a novice and the person who didn't train was an expert. Or the person who trained, they got disqualified for some reason. Right?
Mm.
And then the other person didn't get disqualified. The person who trained got shot halfway through the race, and the person who didn't train did not. All those are good explanations, and they all draw distinctions between the two groups. So one of the things to think is that when you're doing an RE question and you have that where you have like two sets of people and you get an outcome you don't expect, normally what you want to do is draw a distinction between those two groups. That's a pretty common pattern. If you're, you know, if you find yourself struggling with that, if you don't find yourself struggling with that, don't even think about it. Just do the question.
Right. Yeah. Chances are your brain is already recognizing that pattern.
Yeah.
Good one. Another good random example. I love it. Honestly, the more violent it gets, hate to say it, but easier to remember. So
Yeah.
perfect.
It's true.
Amazing.
You do the absurdity to show the principle works, right? It's like the more extreme you get, it tears apart it can blow up the thought that everything's subtle on this test.
So
There's
true.
not too much subtlety, I feel like, on this. I mean, I don't know. There's a decent amount of subtlety in
No,
some
I
sense,
agree. I
but
feel like when I first like there's a very stark difference from starting to read this test and be like, what in the world are they saying? Like it feels like,
yeah,
they use tiny little differences and you're not even picking up on these little things to after you've gone through and you've really just seen so many questions, you've been able to pinpoint those patterns. I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? They're actually kind of obvious when they make these subtle little term shifts that used to
yeah.
seem so subtle.
They
Love
mean
that.
what they say on this test, right?
They really do. They're
That's
so
all there is to
straightforward.
say.
Like, a lot of times the takeaway is just, like, take the words so literally. Like, when they said that, they actually meant it. Like, when they
Mhm.
said "if A, then B," they really meant exactly that, nothing else.
Yeah. Got a good
Alright.
example for that one, but that's
I
maybe that's a
know.
example for another day.
Another
For
day,
I
another
mean,
day when Henry recharges his examples.
mhm.
Perfect. I think that's most of what we were wanting to talk about. Anything else coming to your brain as we wrap up here?
No, nothing. Just that if you're right in the final weeks leading up to February, really do try to look at your wrong answers, or if you don't have a wrong answer journal,
Oh,
start
yes.
thinking about your wrong answers. And do you notice some things that are common in your wrong answers or the problems that you're getting wrong? Right. Try to actually look for that. If it's not coming naturally, then if you actually intentionally look for it, you might find something. You probably will find something, and then you make a plan to move forwards. Beyond that, just to recap, right? You're in a weakening question. You see a study. You should be thinking phenomenon hypothesis, alternative explanation. Right? Necessary assumptions, strengthening, same thing. Shutting down alternative explanations. RRE, drawing distinctions between groups. RC, softer, less descriptive language. Am I missing
Softer,
something?
yes. No, I think that's all good. Agreed.
Yeah.
Amazing. And by the way, I would honestly take this as your guys' sign. Like, if you don't have a wrong answer journal yet, start it now. At the very least, it's
Wadge.
like bullet points. Wadge. You got to wadge. Bullet points of just takeaways. Like, if you're going to do nothing else, do the takeaways column. What am I going to do better next time? What do I keep noticing myself making as a mistake? And so, how am I going to stop that right away? All right.
You want to take us away here, Bailey?
I'll take us right away. Thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully this was helpful as our kind of final push towards February. You know the drill. Make sure that you like, you subscribe, check out all of Seven Sages services. We got an awesome LSAT prep platform. We have ongoing courses. We have live classes you can pop into every day. We have a law school admissions consulting. And the LSAT, it really is hard. It is difficult, but we're going to help you crush it anyways.